Philadelphia in the 1930s. The stock market crash of 1929 was just beginning to affect the wider economy. Local unemployment amounted to 25% against a national average of 15%. To make matters worse, banks were foreclosing at an alarming rate. These were desperate times, and people resorted to unusual remedies to avoid literal starvation. In a city of under 2 million, it became home to recent Italian immigrants who increased from just 75,000 in 1910 to over 155,000 by 1930. They came from either southern Italy or Sicily and were composed of largely illiterate manual workers. Like all the recent immigrants, they were ignored by society and loathed by Irish Americans, who regarded them as inferior. There were limited job opportunities out there, and a few looked for that lucky break that would bring them hope for prosperity. This episode looks at a few of them who saw a chance to get themselves out of the housing tenements and make something of themselves by any means, disregarding the law and without any moral code that society lives by. They were clever, cunning, and ruthless in pursuing their selfish ambitions at other people's expense. This is Vintage Murders and the chilling Philadelphia poison ring. The underworld has ways of coming up with twisted plans to outwit the law and take shortcuts to make fast money. This is the story of two cousins who thought that they had come up with a foolproof plan to make a lot of it and fool the system. Herman Petrillo was born in 1899, just outside of Naples, and emigrated to America in 1910, where he worked as a barber, but eventually opted for easier ways to make an income. In the beginning, his schemes consisted of arson and insurance fraud, but a person can only burn down so many buildings before the police and insurance companies become suspicious. During a visit to the seedier side of town, he ran into a group of men selling counterfeit $5 notes for half the face value. He was so impressed by their quality that he began to study counterfeiting skills and was soon making his own forgeries. His cousin, Paul Petrillo, emigrated from Naples to Philadelphia in 1910. He married shortly after his arrival, and before long owned a tailor shop called Paul Petrillo, custom tailored to the classy dresses. The business quickly prospered, but when the Depression came, he barely survived financially. To support his family, he got into the life insurance business. He sold cheap policies with weekly premiums of 50 cents or $1. The insurance company he worked for did not require a medical examination, so Paul would sell policies to sickly middle-aged men. While the prospect may have sounded alluring to those wanting to ensure their family's well-being, Paul had his own agenda. More times than not, he would list himself, without the policyholder's knowledge, as a brother or cousin of the insured, thus making himself the sole beneficiary. Basically, he was playing the lottery. But this was no ordinary game, and it required the death of the unwitting participant in order to get the big payoff. The gang embraced insurance agents and made highly successful use of the period's widespread cheap insurance policies, often taken out without medical examination, not required for policies under $500, or the knowledge of the principal concerned, who would subsequently meet an agonizing death by arsenic, engineered by the spouse, possibly with intent, possibly in superstitious ignorance of their actions. This went on from 1932 until 1938, when the death of Ferdinando Alfonsi in a hospital brought matters into the open. The solution to this problem was to use a number of insurance policies that would be under $500. This meant that in the event of a claim, there would be no autopsy. The policies were written out to members of the syndicate, with a tiny amount for the widows. Given the scale of the Great Depression, the signing on fee was $300, which wiped out most of the wife's savings, but any figure above $300 ensured the widow's silence. Paul had a good friend called Dr. Morris Bulber. In 1931, the school where he taught closed its doors, and with so many other families of that era, the Depression forced him to move on and look for new opportunities. When money became short, Bulber packed up his wife and 4 children and moved from New York to Philadelphia to get a fresh start, and he began teaching and preparing Jewish boys for their bar mitzvahs. He also circulated leaflets announcing his new practice as a faith healer. They both came up with an insurance scam with a twist. It involved murder. The basic method was conceived in 1932 by Bulber. After one of his female patients aired complaints about her husband's infidelity, the doctor and Petrillo planned for Paul to woo the lonely lady, gaining her cooperation in a plan to kill her wayward spouse and split $10,000 in insurance proceeds. The victim, Anthony Gisgobe, was a heavy drinker, and it proved a simple matter for his wife to strip his clothes off as he lay unconscious, leaving him beside an open window in the dead of winter while he caught his death of cold. The grieving widow split her cash with Bulber and Petrello, and they went in search of other restless, greedy wives. It soon became apparent that Italian husbands, caught up in the middle of the Great Depression, carry little life assurance on their own. Petrillo asked his cousin Herman to impersonate potential victims and apply for large insurance policies. Once several payments had been made, the husbands were eliminated swiftly and efficiently through so-called accidents or invented natural causes. This type of operation required additional help, as Carina Favato and Bulber became an integral part of the scheme. Favato used her reputation as a so-called wise woman and healer, who offered superstitious, unhappily married, murderous or merely gullible Italian women incantations, powders and potions to adjust their lives. These potions usually contained arsenic or antimony, and they were invariably accompanied by excessive insurance policies on the victims, often made out in favour of gang members rather than the supposed poisoned widow beneficiaries. The beauty of the scheme was that in the event of being found out by the police, these women faced the electric chair if caught, thus ensuring their silence. One of Bulber's favourite methods included poison and blows to the head with a sandbag, producing cerebral hemorrhage. But methods were varied depending on the victim. One target, a roofer named Lorenzo, was hurled to his death from an 8-story building, the Petrillo cousins first handing him some French postcards to explain his careless distraction. After roughly a dozen murders, the gang recruited faith healer Carina Favato, known as the witch in her local neighbourhood. Favato had dispatched 3 of her own husbands before going into business full-time as a marriage consultant, poisoning unwanted husbands for a fee. Impressed by Bulber's explanation of the life insurance scam, Favato came on board and brought the gang a list of her prospective clients. By the latter part of 1937, having lasted 8 years, Bulber's ring had finished off an estimated 50 to 100 victims. George Mayer's upholstery cleaning company was in financial trouble. He was eventually directed to Herman Petrillo to talk about a new get-rich-quick scheme he had in mind. Unimpressed, Petrillo countered with a pitch for his acquaintance to secure potential murder victims, a job of a very different kind. Mayer was told that if he were willing to organise the death of Ferdinando Alfonsi, he would be given $500 with an additional $2,500 worth of counterfeit money. Whilst Mayer wasn't interested in killing anyone, he played along to see if he could get an advance of the cash. When that didn't work, he decided to sell the information to the police, who in turn passed him on to the Secret Service, the US Treasury Department concerned with stamping out counterfeiting, as they already had Herman Petrillo under suspicion. Seeing an opportunity to finally catch Petrillo, Landvoigt, the investigating agent, told Mayer he would only get paid if he helped in a sting operation. Landvoigt was more interested in the counterfeit bills than he was in any murder conspiracy, and offered to pay Mayer if he would continue to play along with Petrillo's scheme. The down-and-out businessman had little choice and reluctantly agreed. Landvoigt was already familiar with Petrillo. He had tried for years to arrest him for counterfeiting $5 and $10 bills and had a file 3 inches thick on him, but every time the authorities served a warrant or attempted a sting operation, they came up empty-handed. He also now had an informer who had told him of a group of individuals based in Philadelphia who ran a murder ring to collect insurance money. Landvoigt arranged for Stanley Phillips, a streetwise agent of the Secret Service, to work with Mayer. On August 1, 1938, Mayer and Phillips met with Herman Petrillo at a local diner. Petrillo was uncomfortable discussing the plans in public, so the 3 men went outside and sat in his Dodge sedan. Mayer introduced Phillips as Johnny Phillips, a friend of his who was fresh out of prison after serving time for murder. Herman Petrillo didn't seem to mind, and the conversation soon turned to Alfonsi. He suggested that they take him to the Jersey coast and drown him. They could leave his clothing at the scene, and it would look like an accident. Phillips was not interested in the murder plot and wanted to get his hands on some of Petrillo's counterfeit money. In order to work this in, he suggested that Petrillo give them some money to buy a car. They could use the car to transport the victim to a dark country road, where they could run him over and leave his body there. Petrillo liked the idea, but suggested they steal a car instead, rather than purchase one for the job. Phillips decided not to press the matter, and the men decided to think the crime over. The conversation moved on to another topic, as Petrillo reached into his wallet and pulled out a counterfeit $5 bill. Phillips was awestruck by the quality of it, and quickly started to make arrangements to buy $200 worth of the bogus money. Petrillo, initially reluctant to the deal, finally agreed and said he would need 2 weeks to deliver. Phillips was ecstatic about the possibility of finally arresting Herman Petrillo. After years of undercover work and sting operations, he now had his man right where he wanted him, or so he thought. When the 2-week time period arrived, and then passed, he began to worry that Petrillo might have got wind of their plan, and asked Mayer to try and find out what was going on. Petrillo was nowhere to be found. No one had seen him in over a week, and he could not be found at any of his usual haunts. Agent Phillips got a sick feeling in his stomach when Mayer explained the situation to him. Perhaps they had spent too much time focusing on the forged money, and not enough time protecting the intended victim. Phillips called together several agents, and the group, posing as insurance representatives, went to check on Alfonsi's condition. While they had no problem getting inside, they were shocked when they saw Alfonsi. He was extremely ill, and he could neither move nor speak. The agents then contacted the Philadelphia police. Meanwhile, Petrillo had contacted Mayer and told him he had their money. A meeting was arranged at a local bus stop, and later that day, Mayer and Phillips met him there. Petrillo gave them an envelope which contained 40 counterfeit $5 bills. Phillips was happy to finally get the money, but also concerned about Alfonsi, and decided to see what he could find out. Pretending the men still wanted the job, Phillips asked Petrillo if he still wanted Alfonsi dead. Petrillo grinned and said that they did not have to worry about it. "He is in the hospital, and he is not coming out," he smirked. Alfonsi was found to have large amounts of arsenic in his system, and eventually died. With the fake money now safely in the hands of the agents, which provided crucial evidence against the counterfeiting ring, the case was handed over to a Philadelphia district attorney named McDevitt. Herman was brought in, and McDevitt, not sure as to whether they could pin anything on him as he had managed to avoid the law for so many years, was surprised to say the least when Petrillo began to confess to a multitude of murders, claiming his cousin and another were the ringleaders. They were also joined by 6 investigators from the insurance companies, eager to claw back the money from the insurance fraud. It was now up to the assistant district attorney, McDevitt, who wasted little time in arresting Petrillo on charges of attempted murder. But when Alfonsi died a few weeks later, the charge was changed to homicide. When McDevitt questioned Petrillo, he was skeptical that he would walk away with anything he could use. After all, this was the same man the Secret Service had worked so hard for so many years to arrest. To McDevitt's amazement, Petrillo would not shut up. He provided the DA with a mind-boggling list of victims and conspirators, claiming that his cousin, Paul Petrillo, along with Morris Bulber, were the masterminds behind the entire operation. McDevitt was really surprised as Petrillo named one victim after another, and that all but 3 of the victims had been killed with arsenic. Investigators now had the daunting task of proving these allegations. The only way they could get solid proof would be to exhume every victim. McDevitt already had Fernando Alonso's test results and decided to proceed with that case. He knew that he could always file charges regarding the other cases later, and wanted to get started on the prosecution for Alfonsi's murder. With pharmacists testifying that the Petrillos had approached them for various poisons, 16 people were eventually prosecuted in connection for their part of the poison ring. On February 2nd, 1939, the grand jury indicted Herman and Paul Petrillo, Stella Alfonsi, and Maria Favato. Maria's husband was the first body to be exhumed, and her late husband's autopsy revealed large quantities of arsenic in his system. The New York Times reported on February the 17th that the jury reached its verdict in only 7.5 minutes. The defendants would be going to trial. Herman Petrillo's trial began on March the 13th, 1939, in Philadelphia's City Hall. The presiding judge, Harry McDevitt, no relation to DA Vincent McDevitt, was one of the most feared judges in all of Pennsylvania. A defense attorney's worst nightmare, the judge was known in legal circles as Hanging Harry. Even though Petrillo's lawyer, Milton Leidner, was a close friend of the judge, the defense attorney did not expect any leniency. Luigi Sissone, an agent for Monumental Life Insurance, told the jury he had helped Petrillo get insurance on the ailing Alfonsi. Afterwards, Secret Service informant Mayer and undercover agent Stanley Phillips consecutively took the stand and testified about Petrillo's attempts to have them kill Alfonsi. A pharmacist testified that Petrillo approached him on numerous occasions in an attempt to purchase typhoid germs and similar poisons. Next, a physician gave testimony in regards to the quantities of arsenic found during an autopsy of Alfonsi. Petrillo was identified by the insurance companies as responsible for buying the tainted insurances. He denied all charges, and on March the 21st, the jury were unconvinced and he was sentenced to death. He took their decision badly and started to attack them. 4 bailiffs had to restrain him and escort him out of the courtroom. There would be further investigations carried out. On the conclusion of the trial, investigators announced to the press that 70 bodies would be exhumed and examined for signs of arsenic. Maria Favato was the next member of the media-dubbed poison ring to go on trial. However, in a shocking move, she pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, which included both her stepson and her own husband. On May the 25th, Maurice Bulber pleaded guilty to murder, possibly hoping his plea would earn him a lesser sentence. His plan worked, and he was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment. In September, Paul Petrillo also pleaded guilty. He was not quite as lucky as Bulber, and was sentenced to die in the electric chair. The last major player in the poison ring, Rose Carina, who the press called the Rose of Death, was found not guilty following a brief jury trial. On March 31st, 1941, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania electrocuted Paul Petrillo. 7 months later, on October the 20th, Herman Petrillo met the same fate. 13 years later, on February the 15th, 1954, Maurice Bulber died of natural causes while awaiting his 3rd parole petition. In the end, 13 men and women besides Bulber and the Petrillos were either convicted of or pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. All these convicted killers served long sentences, the shortest being not less than 14 years in prison.